Hello and welcome to week 5 of the Hopefully MOOC Hangout. We're just going to wait a few minutes for the video to and then we'll start the discussion. And hopefully you're able to see myself lower the screen as well as Krysta Mostly. And just to show you how close we're getting our technology, I'm doing some part of that system in Canada. We are improving.
Hi everyone. I think once I start talking, you should be able to see me. I don't know if you can, but let me know if you can in the questions section anyway. And then if you can't, well, hopefully you can just hear my voice then, and we can share the answering of the questions between Laura and I. So hi and welcome to the Google Hangout for week 5.
We still have 0 viewers, so I'm just going to wait a sec.
Okay, good idea. I mean, it's a bit of a strange time for people in North America, I guess, because it's middle of the morning. So, oh well, we'll wait and see what happens. Maybe people can take an early lunch and join us. Yeah, 11. Well, 11 where I am, depending on how far west you are. Maybe it's earlier.
Or depending on far east, it's later.
Yes, that's true.
Oh no, we've got 2 now. Welcome to our viewers.
Okay. I hope everyone can hear us all right as well, because we're doing it from 2 separate locations. So hopefully the audio comes through properly, as well as it was last week. Well, I hope it was good last week. It seemed good.
For those of you who just joined us as viewers, can you type in the question box to let us know if you can see myself and Krysta? Depending on who's talking, because Krysta's actually back in Canada right now, and I'm still in Scotland. And also let me know if you can hear us okay, if you wouldn't mind typing in to verify that this is actually working as well. If you think it's working.
Yeah, because sometimes, Laura, I'm still having a hard time hearing you. So if it sounds like I didn't hear what you said, you'll have to say it again. I'm not just being quiet. Yeah.
I don't know. All right, well, I will get started, and hopefully somebody will verify that this is working well for you guys out there as well. This week seems to be quite a difficult week for some of you, because we started talking about things that is a bit ethically difficult or just difficult to talk about, such as killing animals and death. So we're going to start off just by talking about some of the general questions that were brought up in the forum, but then we will spend a bit of time talking about killing. So if at any point you feel uncomfortable with the discussion, do feel free just to, you don't have to say this is anything that might upset you. So let's start with a query was brought up about the farms that Vicky was visiting for the first couple of videos. So looking at a free-range poultry facility, laying facility, and a free-range cage-led facility with range for the facility. And it was brought up that these farms look quite clean, an absence of poo noted. And the cage system, anyway, it's a pretty standard practice that under the cages where the droppings collect, they'd have manure belt scrapers, or the manure belt would move and fluff manure in a pit or being away from the birds. So really in these systems you shouldn't see large buildups of droppings under the birds. And in the free-range system as well, even with tiered systems or aviary systems, they do try to arrange these so that a bird on an upper level isn't going to be directly above a bird on the lower level, so that the younger bird shouldn't be getting defecated upon regularly. The droppings should fall off to the side and just end up in an area where there are less birds. And again, you have to remember that a lot of poultry producers really do have to think like that, especially putting it online. But yeah, somebody's having to hearing me right now. Krysta, are you able to hear me?
I can hear you, but it is quite difficult to hear exactly what you're saying. So I wonder if, Carol, were you watching last week, and did last week sound better than it is now? Me too. Okay, so yeah, it seems like a number of people are having trouble.
I'm going to try.
Anna and Carol, can you hear me okay when I'm speaking, or is it just from Laura's end? Or can you hear me at all?
I hear you at all. I don't know. Is this better for me? I'm now not
Actually,
using the headset.
Yeah, that's better for me too, Laura.
Okay, because I thought in theory the headset should have made it clearer because I'm talking into the microphone. Anyway, sorry about that, guys. We were just talking about the farms that were visited and how they were quite clean looking, compared to maybe what you would expect. And it's just to remember that binding producers were happy to let us go on farm and film the farm, especially them putting it up for the public to see, free access. These are going to be your better farms, and they're going to be quite conscientious managers and staff. I'm also not sure how far into the production cycle they were. Oh, great. So possibly if it is early in the production, there's not going to be the build-up of droppings or capping of litter or anything to that effect that there would be perhaps later in the production. But it's also down to management, perhaps because these farms are obviously conscientious. They're happy to let us go in and film and let the world see what their farms look like. So maybe they do take extra care to keep things, say, top up the litter, scrape the manure belts more often, and so on.
Yeah, I have something to add to that as well, Laura. So in addition to what you were saying about free, well, first of all, cage systems will just be within the cage is more or less one level except for the perches, but the perches aren't generally high enough that a bird could sort of be pooped on from a bird sitting on top of a perch. So in the cage system, like you said, it's all the manure is all removed underneath the cage on a belt, and because there is such a high traffic within the cage, any manure or exterior that stays on, that potentially stays on the wire flooring, it's generally sort of scraped off with the high traffic of sort of foot traffic of the birds. So generally the wire does stay quite clean, unless there's a particular area that, gets doesn't get a lot of traffic maybe, and then gets a lot of poop built up. But more or less the wire itself does stay quite clean, and the farms that Vicky was in for the filming weren't especially clean for her to come in. So that is what the farm looked like on a regular basis. But again, like Laura said, it's potentially earlier in the production system. So as you go on week by week later in the production cycle, then of course things will get a bit dirtier. But more or less that is what it looks like all the time on a well-managed farm anyway. And for free-range systems that have multi-tiers within the barn, like Laura said as well, generally they're manufactured so that the birds can't poop on each other, so that they're either spaced out so that they don't, or there's things underneath to catch the poop and then to take it away. And this is also something that is checked during some routine inspections for the government. So the inspector will look at also, obviously the furnishings within the cage to see if there's any potential areas where a bird could be soiled. And then also just looking at the birds themselves to see, okay, well, I have, 20% of birds that have been soiled, which probably doesn't happen, but it might, let's say. And then you'd bring that up with the producer and say, well, I've got an issue here with one of my checkpoints that, obviously there is some place that the birds are getting soiled, so you need to address this. And then the inspector would come back, say a month later, and just follow up with that farm and see if they rectify the situation.
Yeah, thanks, Krysta. And also, just to quickly bring broiler farms into this. The broilers tend to go on deep litter, so early in the production cycle, the litter will be quite clean. And one of the issues for broilers is that as they grow, they get bigger and become less active, and they spend more time sitting in contact with the litter and they're dropping. So you'll often see towards the end of the production cycle, broilers might actually look a bit dirtier because they have been spending time sitting, in their droppings, or their droppings, or wet litter even. And, as we've discussed in this course, this is potentially a welfare problem with some of these big breast burns or hot burns on the birds who are sitting in contact with their excrement. And it's difficult to do anything about this. You could recommend maybe changing the litter partway through, but you have to weigh this up against the stress of that for the birds. Because this would be quite pathetic for them to have to round into a variable shed, to have a person coming into cleaning shed, and then having them fixed again. So it's generally thought at this moment that it's better just to try to put down quite a deep layer of litter in the first start and hope that it still able to maintain and can always pop up again if it gets quite bad. But once they're underneath the upper leg is get down as well.
So I think there's someone else again saying they're having problems hearing.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with that.
Oh, maybe when you move your face a little bit closer to the computer, it seems to come a bit better.
Oh, I can get really close. It gets better. I can yell. Oh no.
That seems to be okay for me now.
Well, maybe I should just let you do the bulk of the talking, Krysta, if my audio is not going to be reliable.
Well, I can hear you fine now. It's when you move a bit closer to the computer. I mean, we can, yeah, we'll share.
Right, so we'll just move on again to another, I think, topic that was a bit debated this week. And I know we weren't able to get the download link for Barry Thorpe's interview, which was kind of a is free range always best type talk. I'm still waiting to hear back from the computer guys. And if I can get this download to work, I will. I was supposed to have them today. I'm not sure what happened there. But for those of you who were able to stream the video or read the transcripts of it, well, I think what we were discussing earlier is that, you know, Barry is a vet. So he's looking at things from quite a health perspective. So disease, you know, incidents of things like maybe looking at feather condition or are there mites or any other parasites, things like that. Whereas Krysta and I, being from a more behavior background, would also look at things like abnormal behavior patterns, looking at as well positive behaviors. Krysta, do you want to take over? They're having a hard time hearing you.
Yeah, I can see. Yeah. So to follow up with what Laura was saying, that I think I'll start from the beginning anyway. I think some people had concerns that they weren't able to. Okay, so now people saying Laura's better. Anyway, weren't able to get the download for the interview with the vet Barry Thorpe. And I think Laura said she's following up with the computer people or with the help center in Coursera. And so hopefully that will be rectified sooner rather than later. But hopefully you were able to stream it, even if you couldn't download it and just watch it from there, or at least look at the transcripts, the subtitles. So yes, so what he was talking about is, well, the title of the video is free range better? And so he's coming at that sort of dilemma from the perspective of a veterinarian, where they're focused mainly on health of the birds. And whereas Laura and I, as well as Vicky, we come from more of a behavior and welfare point of view. So we're not only looking at, although health is important to us as well, we're not only considering that when we talk about the overall welfare status of a certain housing system. We don't only focus on the health of the birds, though that is a major aspect, but we also look at things like abnormal behaviors, the opportunity to perform natural or normal behaviors, and as well the presence of abnormal behaviors such as, say, pacing or feather pecking. And so things like that, and sort of overall stress of birds. How is the management, handling the birds, and are the birds, fearful of humans, overly fearful of humans, and that sort of thing. So when you watch the video from Barry, just keep that in mind that he's obviously talking. He does seem to talk quite poorly about the free range, but he is coming from mainly a health-based background. And as well, we had a limited time to his interview to get that up and to talk. So we didn't want to have, an hour-long discussing every single point of free range and cage production. But in general, from a health perspective, cages do outweigh free-range systems, just in terms of disease prevalence and spread of diseases as well. Because the birds are housed, yes, they are in large groups, and within the shed, it will be quite a few number of birds in the cage systems as well. But because they're separated into smaller groupings, you can sort of control the spread of, say, feather pecking or even just a disease a little bit more easily than in a free-range system where you have thousands of birds interacting, and it's hard to pinpoint exactly what the source of feather pecking is, or the source of, say, disease outbreak, and then how quickly it can spread through the flock. So in both situations, yes, disease and abnormal behaviors can spread, but it seems like in a cage system, it is a little bit easier because they are contained in smaller groups already. So you can pinpoint. And in cage systems, well, in all farms, I think within the UK, well, I think around the world anyway, the producers should be inspecting their birds at least once a day, and sometimes this happens more. So any mortalities should be identified within the day and then removed from the environment or the cage system. Obviously, this isn't always the case because humans are humans and humans make mistakes. But in general, mortalities are picked up on a regular basis and aren't left unseen or unnoticed. So yeah, there's definitely pros and cons for health. Well, say more pros for cage systems for the health aspect, but then there's pros for say normal behavior and the lack of abnormal behavior in free range systems. But again, a lot of it comes down to management. So it's not always that one system, regardless of who's managing it, is better or worse than the other. There are pros and cons about both systems. And then with you put the management on top, that's when you get the actual welfare status of the farm. So just because you have a cage system doesn't always mean that the welfare, say, behavioral welfare will be worse than a free range system. And just because you have free range doesn't mean that always the health of the status of the flock will be worse than the cage system. You have a bit more risk factors for either, for different aspects for either production system, but then management on top is kind of one of the biggest risk factors as well. So yeah, it comes down to management when you look at, obviously, the overall welfare status of a farm. And in addition, mostly the videos that, the production systems that we describe are commercial production systems, not just backyard farming. So just because something might be better or worse in a backyard system doesn't mean that it will always translate over to a commercial system. So when in a commercial system, we generally have higher numbers of birds in general, and then also less space allowance than a backyard system would. So you've got just group size as well as space, density already compounding that situation. So keep in mind that when we discuss behavior and welfare for commercial chickens, it will obviously differ than what you see in your backyard hens. Oh, Laura, now I've lost your audio completely. I can see your lips moving, but I can't. Yeah, okay, hold on one second, she says. Ah, yes, I hear now. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just trying different settings to see if that's better or worse. We have a question that I've put up, so you should all be able to see it, concerning rat poop, and whether there's any issues to the chickens or eggs if the birds eat the rat poop. It's kind of hard to say without knowing the health status of the rats. I mean, if they're perfectly fine, healthy rats, yeah, no, it shouldn't have any negative effect really on your chickens or your eggs. Obviously, if these rats are carrying any kind of diseases, though, then you could end up with chickens who either have the disease or have the disease passed in the eggs. So, I mean, if you're confident these are healthy organic rats, then I wouldn't be concerned about it. I mean, there's lots of other droppings I'm sure they're consuming as well as bugs and possibly frogs, lizards, whatnot. And as long as the animals they're eating themselves aren't, diseased, then I probably wouldn't worry too much about it. It's like one of these kind of, old wives' tales about free-range systems that, oh, but the eggs will taste like, worms or bugs because that's what the chickens are eating. And no, they don't. They taste like eggs because obviously whatever's being eaten is broken down into its nutritional components and then being put in the egg. So no, I mean, as long as you're happy your rats are healthy, I wouldn't be that bothered about that.
Laura, I see another question here about broilers laying eggs from ACO, I think, or ICO. So it said, I've been waiting to see if this was answered through the course. Been wondering if broilers lay eggs as well as layers, but am I right to think that broilers are dispatched before they come into lay? So they can, but they don't get to. Oh, here it is. Yeah. So yeah, you're right. Broilers, if they are grown to sexual maturity, they can lay eggs. It's not that they don't. It's not that they can't lay eggs. But yes, broilers are slaughtered at generally 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks of age. And so they usually come into sexual maturity at about 22 to 25 weeks of age. So that's obviously they're quite considered juveniles at that point when they are slaughtered. So that's, I think we touched on this a bit in maybe week 3. I don't remember which week, to be honest. But because broilers have been bred with such a high propensity to put on a lot of muscle mass, when they're fed ad libitum, which means that they eat as much as they want to eat, so they just have free access to the feed, they grow too quickly so their body weight is too high, as well as the fact that their skeleton hasn't quite developed as fast as their body has. So not only does their body weigh too much, but their skeleton is quite underdeveloped at that point to hold the amount of body mass that they have. So for the broilers that do lay the eggs, we call them broiler breeders, and that's the parent stock of the broilers. So they are quite severely feed restricted so that they aren't too heavy, and it gives the skeleton a chance to develop as quickly as their body does, and so that we can take them through to sexual maturity and beyond, so that we can get eggs from them, fertilized eggs from them, that will then hatch into the broiler or the actual meat birds that are slaughtered at 6 or 8 weeks of age. So I don't know if that was a bit convoluted, a convoluted answer. I mean, Laura is better suited to answer that probably because she does a lot of work with broiler breeders and trying to improve welfare, or at least, assess the welfare in terms of their status in terms of hunger when they're quite severely feed restricted.
Yeah, what Krysta said is correct. Basically, female broilers are completely capable of laying eggs, but they're slaughtered too young. They're still babies. They aren't sexually mature, and that's where we have the broiler breeders. And it is just about it's mainly about skeletal development. So they're putting on a lot of weight, and their skeleton is quite cartilage, we'll say. So their skeleton is able to be from the weight that's being put on, and then it also leads to other things like the necrosis or breakdown of cartilage and bone joints. And so this is why they're feed restricted. So I work with broiler breeders, as Krysta said. So commercially, these birds get to eat about maybe 1/3 of what a normal broiler would. So they grow quite slowly, and they are quite physically healthy. They look really good. They move really well. But they also display a lot of abnormal behavior because they are chronically hungry. So you'll see they'll spend a lot of time drinking and playing with the drinker, trying to get gut filled through water. They'll spot peck, so just pecking the area of the pen. They'll spend a lot of time just foraging. And they'll also see some pacing behavior in them as well. So they're physically quite healthy, but we're very concerned that mentally they're their welfare is quite poor from a psychological state or an emotional state. And just to give you an example, my broiler breeders, I had different feed treatments. So we reared them all up to about 6 weeks of age on the general broiler breeder diet, so feed restricted. And then, remember a broiler is culled at 4 to 5 weeks of age, 5 to 6 weeks of age. So my birds are already older than this. And then we started to feed them ad libitum. And because we slowed their growth for those first 6 weeks, I had broiler breeders at 12 weeks of age who were weighing 3 kilograms, which is, around a slaughter weight broiler or more. And these birds were still very physically healthy compared to a broiler. They could walk fine, they were active, they didn't spend as much time inactive. So just this early life development, getting to slow their growth down, means that they're then just able to be a much healthier bird in the long term. It's often called the broiler breeder dilemma because you're making an animal physically healthy while impairing its emotional state, or vice versa. I'm just gonna. So basically, the question that's kind of a follow-up to that is, how do you decide which should be the broiler breeders? Well, basically, the broiler breeders are kind of they have the same basic genetics as your broilers, but they're kind of a different line. They're more of a pure line, whereas sometimes the broilers will be a mix of 2 pure lines, depending on what you're trying to achieve. But mine were basically a pure line that were similar to a pure line of broiler. and they just basically, you take the birds and you rear them up and you look for the ones that have fast growth rates, and then you take them and you look at their offspring, and the offspring that has fast growth rates, you would then breed from those parents. So it's keeping the birds around, we're getting them to reproduce and have offspring, raise the offspring as a meat bird, see how they produce, and then go back to your broiler breeders and decide who's going to be in your breeding program or not based on the characteristics of the offspring. All right, just loading another question. Rather than killing all the male hens when hatched, or I guess the male laying layer birds, has there been any research as to whether they could be utilized in any way, such as using the droppings for fertilizer or raising them for pet food or something? One of the major problems with this is that they have such low monetary value, male laying strain birds, that it's not worth the amount of money you're putting into them for whatever the product's going to be. Chicken feed's very expensive. It's one of the most expensive components of chicken production. And so whatever product you're going to put them in, you're never going to recoup your losses on the food, the electricity, heating, whatnot, of raising these birds up. It's not pleasant, but sometimes when the male chicks are killed, they're put through a macerator, so they're basically made into a pate. Sorry, this sounds really horrible. But they then sometimes will use this to feed zoo carnivores or mink or other types of carnivores that would need protein. So, while it's not great, at least it's better than possibly just wasting. And I think oh no, I'm breaking up again. Krysta, can you rephrase what I just said or put it in your own words?
Okay, because I was muting myself because I thought that it was making you sound better on my end anyway. Okay, so what Laura said, if you couldn't hear her for that question, you can see the question on the top right there, but it's asking about the male laying hen strains. And when hatched as chicks, then instead of killing them or mass euthanizing them, is there any way that they can be used in such a way to use their droppings for fertilizer or used for pet food? Laura was saying that because they're so low in value, so the meat, obviously because they are a laying strain, they wouldn't have the same meat content or muscle content as a broiler strain would. So selling them for, say, human consumption wouldn't be viable because the consumers are used to having quite a large breast and other body parts that have quite a lot of meat on them. And fertilizer, would be, I think there is already so many droppings on the industry, within the industry, that there's not really a need for it. So like Laura was saying, you couldn't recoup your costs for selling the males or raising them up and selling the males or selling the fertilizer, so that it wouldn't be an economically viable situation. And so also Laura was saying when the males chicks are hatched, they're generally either euthanized with gas or through a macerator, which is just a large drum, I guess, that uses sort of just a heavy percussive force to sort of just grind the chicks up immediately. And she said it sounds quite terrible, and it does. But death is probably, and unconsciousness is probably pretty imminent, so it's not necessarily terrible for welfare. So the chicks then do get used to go into pet food, say, or to use for other carnivore food, so zoos or snakes or stuff like that. So if the chick is whole, I suppose, say, killed by gas killing methods, then they could be sold to zoos or to pet food stores for snakes and other carnivores that would need to eat, say, a whole animal rather than just having processed animal meat. I don't know if that answers your question, or if you could hear Laura instead, and I've just repeated the whole thing again. But anyway, oh sorry, Tamsin, I see that you have a question on. Can you use a rabbit stunner on chickens? It's a captive bolt system. Can I use a percussive stunner using the small ammo on chickens? I will try to answer this to the best of my ability, and then Laura can sort of make up my lack of knowledge on this. I believe that rabbit stunners can be used as long as when done correctly, the captive bolts or whether they're penetrating or non-penetrating do work quite effectively, though you still need to check their reflexes to make sure that you've applied the device properly. And if you haven't applied the device properly, then to apply it again or to use a different method, say cervical dislocation, to then end up killing the chicken rather than letting it suffer. Yes, I think the one problem, say, with a non-penetrating device is that because of the combs, it makes the application a bit more difficult. But if it's a penetrating device, then because the brains are quite small, I think you can do quite a bit of damage as long as you, again, aim it properly and then make sure that they don't move right before you fire the device. And then also make sure you don't move yourself as well. So I don't know, Laura, if you want to add anything to that. I'll mute myself, so hopefully your audio is a bit better.
Yeah, hopefully this works okay. Yes, we actually did a study here a few years ago looking at a rabbit device called the Zinger, which is a penetrating captive bolt, which goes to the top of the head, and the bolt should penetrate into the brain. And like Krysta said, when it's done properly, it does work really well, and it does destroy the brain, and therefore, render unconsciousness quite immediately. The problem that we found is because it is made for a rabbit head, which is distinctly different shape than a chicken head, that it had the potential to slip or move off to the side, so you weren't getting a direct brain hit all the time. Obviously, it's different when we're doing larger numbers than just you with your own birds who may be better with being handled. So I would, you can use it, and if it's being done properly, then yes, it can be quite effective. But like Krysta said, be prepared to be monitoring your, looking for signs of death or signs of life, and being prepared to apply a secondary method right away if it doesn't look like it's worked properly, or if you know it's not worked properly because it's slid and moved and just nicked the side of the head or something. And similar to your multi-purpose percussive stun, I'm not sure exactly what one you're referring to, and I'm only familiar with a select few. And generally these do work quite well when they're used correctly. Maybe if you're unsure, you could see about having a bird euthanized or culled in another way, and then applying it to the cadaver just to verify how it's going to work. If you're at all unsure, that's a really good way to go. That's the way we started looking at killing in chickens, is we overdosed the birds on barbiturates, so like a vet would, putting an animal to sleep. And then we applied the devices to cadavers, just so that we wouldn't take forward any devices that we were at all unhappy with. I'm hoping that, nobody's complained about my audio, so I'm hoping that that's okay. All right, we'll switch slight topics again. Krysta, you can see the question too, I hope. So this is asking what you should do if you want to produce broiler chicks instead of buying them from a hatchery, or broiler breed or something special. Not necessarily. I mean, you can, as long as you raise your birds up to be mature adults, and obviously you need a male and female because they have to be fertilized eggs to produce chicks. You can produce broilers or meat birds from your existing birds, but just remember what we said about broilers growing quite quickly and putting on a lot of muscle. So if you want them to live long enough to be sexually mature and reproduce well, you will need to feed restrict them earlier in life, so you slow their growth down. So you can certainly just take whatever birds you are buying as broilers basically from your hatchery. And if you look online, Ross or Cobb, they'll have instructions or guidelines for feeding broiler breeders. And if you just follow these, the birds will grow slow enough that they should be quite healthy and live to sexual maturity. And then you just need to have a boy and a girl and get some fertilized eggs. So no, I mean, you can certainly buy fancy broiler breeders if you want to, but you don't need to. You can produce broilers using your broilers, but just making sure that you've grown them slowly up to an adult age. Sorry, Krysta, did you want to add anything?
No, I think you answered that question quite well. I was going to say pretty much the exact same thing. Yeah, so of course a geneticist might tell you a broiler breeder is something special, but if you aren't necessarily worried about having the biggest breast muscle or the fastest growing birds, then no, broiler breeders aren't anything special other than the fact that they are feed restricted and they are able to get to a healthy body weight at sexual maturity. So that's the only thing. You can very easily do it yourself as long as the birds are at a healthy weight and will get eggs once they reach sexual maturity. So there actually are quite a few questions coming in, Laura, that I can't keep up with them this week.
I'm going to pop one up that I think is in my mind the next one.
Right. Okay. Which one were you focusing on next?
It should be. Can you not see it in the top?
I think there's a bit of a delay. Oh, there it is. Okay. Here, I'll mute myself if you want to take that one.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So, do predators like foxes cause chicken stress affect their welfare? And your hens are in a fox-proof system, touch wood, and don't seem particularly fazed by the visitors. But you've heard they could die of fright or heart attack. It is possible, especially say if the fox did get in with your chickens and chase them around, it could cause them enough stress that they potentially could suffer some kind of coronary episode. This would be more likely if you had broilers especially. Broilers don't do well with A, stress, or B, being made to run around a lot, especially later in their production cycle. I think the main threat of foxes, probably for your hens, would be if the fox got in and actually killed some of them. And while it would be stressful if any birds did survive, they would be quite stressed. I wouldn't think they would necessarily die of this. I think they would be more likely to die of injuries from the fox. So really, you're in a fox-proof system, and it just really would be a matter of making sure it was maintained, that the structure continued to be secure and sound. There weren't any holes or openings the fox could get through. It is a difficult situation because, of course, your hens are going to be quite attractive to a fox, but obviously you don't want the fox near your hens. So it's just about, I guess, being quite vigilant in the upkeep of your hutch or your system, so that you minimize the chances of this happening.
I agree with you, Laura. I don't have anything else to add. I see there's a question coming in about the difference between stun guns that you can purchase as defensive measures, so like say a police stun gun, and chicken stunners. Can you use a stun gun to kill a chicken, I wonder, or just to stun a chicken? I'm not sure. Thank you so much for answering my question. Okay. Well, that one's a bit hard to answer because I'm not sure what the voltage is for a stun gun that's used for like stunning people. But what's used in the processing plant to stun chickens is, well, first the birds are shackled. I think Vicky did touch on this a bit in this week's lecture, I believe, one of this week's lectures. So they're shackled, so they're hanging by their feet with their head hanging down, and then they pass through a water bath. And what's an electrified water bath. So once their head touches the water bath, then they're stunned so that they actually are rendered unconscious. Whereas a human stun gun doesn't actually render the humans unconscious. Granted, we also are bigger, obviously, and you're not applying the stun to someone's brain, say. So I'm not sure if the voltage on a stun gun would be sufficient to stun a chicken, though I probably wouldn't use it just because it seems a bit awkward, and I don't know where you would apply the actual stunner to, considering it's made for a human body. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend it because I don't actually know if it would work or not. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. I don't know if Laura, you have any other ideas on that.
No, I agree with what you said. I think just in theory, it potentially would work because it's made for a person. People are bigger. You can potentially pass the current over the chicken's brain, but it's obviously never been tested, so I would not recommend it just on the basis that we don't know for sure. You can hypothesize, but I wouldn't try that on a live bird just in case, because we don't know the effect. And obviously, chickens have a very different metabolism to people. It's much higher, so they do process things differently. So yeah, it's an interesting thought, and it potentially could be modified even, but I wouldn't try it just in case. And I'm just going to quickly follow up with Tamsin's question about the percussive device. And she said it was similar to the one that Vicky had, which was the cached poultry killer. Even though technically it's still a stunning device here, not a killing device. So something like that, we found these percussive devices with the ammo rounds worked very well in killing the poultry. Legally here, if you apply it, you still then either have to surgically dislocate the bird or cut the carotids and bleed them as well, because it is only classed as a stunning device. But it did basically kill the bird almost instantaneously, because it did destroy the brain quite quickly upon application. So for me personally, for the devices I've seen applied, if you're not comfortable, say, doing something like cervical dislocation, then these captive bolt devices, they do work really well. And especially with a small number of birds, it's not as big a deal to keep it maintained and be changing the cartridge for every kill. The problem morely comes when you're trying to, clear a shed of, 20,000 birds, and somebody's not going to be sitting there changing the ammo round with every bird. So I would definitely, I definitely like the way those work, and I would be happy using one on any birds I was culling if for whatever reason I couldn't surgically dislocate.
I agree with you, Laura.
Thanks. Sorry, I was just popping up another question. I can't read and speak simultaneously.
Yeah, I know. That's my 2 cents. I agree.
So the question, I don't know if you can all see it yet, it will pop up in a second, is can you breed a heavy bird like a broiler with a lighter egg-laying hen and get a good laying broiler? And that's actually quite interesting, because really this is where your broilers and layers descended from, was birds who both laid eggs and produced an okay amount of meat. So yeah, you could certainly breed a bird that contains more muscle or grows more muscle mass with a bird who's a good egg layer, and get a bird who's what we would call a dual purpose bird. So she wouldn't lay quite as many eggs as your good egg producer, and she wouldn't produce quite as much meat as your, main meat bird. But she would do both in a way that you could certainly have enough eggs to eat. And then, after whatever you consider a reasonable amount of time, you could color and still get, a reasonable portion of meat off her as well. So that's actually probably what a number of you have at home, because we tend to work with these commercial strains, which are heavily selected for either eggs or meat. But when you get into some of the more fancy breeds, a lot of them can do both reasonably well, just not at the top ends of, either production scale. Krysta? Sorry.
I agree. No, what Laura says is true, and probably if you do have sort of commercial strains of either, potentially sort of a dual-purpose bird or a strain that you sort of either make yourself or buy in, that's sort of more a heritage strain, would probably do better in a backyard system than the really high-producing commercial strains that Laura was speaking about before. So yeah, there's nothing to say that you can't breed a broiler bird and a laying egg strain bird to get sort of a dual purpose bird. Again, just keep in mind that when you are thinking about breeding a broiler, you would have to then reach them, like we spoke about before, reach them to sexual maturity. They would have to reach sexual maturity and also be at a healthy body weight. So you would probably have had to feed restrict them during. Oh, you're having difficulty hearing me. Oh dear.
I win.
Well, anyway, I'm just pretty much reiterating what Laura said anyway. So no new information really from me. But do we have any more questions, Laura?
There's no new questions that I can see. So I thought just for the last couple minutes, unless other questions come in, we might talk a bit about kind of an ethical dilemma that was brought up on the forum this week. And that's one of these kind of really difficult areas of, people enjoy eating meat, they enjoy using animal products, but then they also feel, sadness, guilt, whatever about the animals dying or being killed, and kind of how to, morally come to terms with that? Or even how do we feed, all the people in the world and still have good animal welfare? Is it possible, or do we have to kind of choose one or the other or go for a middle ground? And I mean, it's a really difficult issue. I mean, everybody's going to come to their own kind of ethical framework themselves and decide what's right for them. But, it is hard. And you could say that, well, maybe I'm going to maybe eat less meat because I'm not happy with everything that's done. Or I'm only going to buy recognized higher welfare brands and just try to make small differences that way. Or you could just argue that if you're not happy with the animal being killed, maybe you just shouldn't eat the animal at all. Krysta, do you want to weigh in? It's hard to debate against myself because I always win.
Yeah, Laura, I agree with what you're saying. Yeah, I think animal welfare is kind of a rich man's game anyway. So when we're talking about feeding the world's population and still maintaining high animal welfare standards, it's quite hard to do that in say countries or societies where human welfare is impaired as well. And I think we did actually talk a bit about this last week too in our Google Hangout, didn't we, Laura? That it's very difficult to sort of balance the two when you have a situation where, human welfare is impaired, and coming in to say, well, you need to do such and such to improve animal welfare when the humans themselves are starving or struggling to find enough food to feed themselves is a different situation than when you're talking about strict regulations that come with farming practices, say in the UK or I mean, even in other parts of the world as well. So it is a bit of an ethical situation to talk about, eating meat, but then also increasing animal welfare standards, but then also feeding the world, and the ethical issues of killing animals, and just some of the actual moral obligations we have as keepers of animals as well.
All right,
so I see your question.
I'm going to say that, sorry.
Yeah, so so on recognizing a dead chicken, I know from experience that there are some inexperienced farmers that have mistaken a chicken in shock for a dead chicken. Could you just dump water on the chicken to get a response and make sure that they're actually dead versus just in shock? I have never come across a situation where you would want to dump water on a chicken. Are you talking about, say, you apply killing method and you're checking to make sure the chicken is dead, or are you just talking about, say, a chicken that you find within the shed that you think had died, say, overnight, and you're picking it up to put in dead stock? I suppose you'd want to check for reflexes. If you applied a killing device, like Vicky said in the lecture, you should see a number of behaviors that happen sort of in sequence after you've applied the killing method. So the bird will go into sort of convulsions where there's a lot of sort of vigorous wing flapping and leg paddling. And then you might see some eye reflexes still present for the first few seconds post application, but then those should stop, sort of reflecting sort of brain death within the chicken. And then you would get to the point where they go into atonic immobility type thing, where the muscles start lengthening and stretching and then being quite stiff. And then maybe lastly, you would see piloerection with the feathers kind of going up and down, and then the vent will sort of finally just relax, and that would be you can sort of check the eyes to get a response, and if you do get some sort of nictitating membrane response, or check with a light and you get pupillary response, then potentially the chicken will just, if you do get a response, then obviously you haven't applied the killing device properly. I'm not sure about the dumping water on the chicken. I can't speak to that extent, but maybe Laura has a better idea of that method to get a response from the chicken.
Well, I guess it depends on if the chicken that you thought was dead or in shock, that was in shock, was actually conscious and in shock, or unconscious. Because an unconscious chicken could still be alive, but wouldn't respond to any kind of startling stimulus. If your chicken was alive or was conscious, and you dump water on it, it may react. But then you also have a chicken that's, possibly in shock and not doing well and now wet. So unless you're planning on then killing that chicken right away, it's probably not best for the chicken. My go-to is always to check the nictitating membrane of the clear eyelid, because it'll come over. If you touch the chicken in the eye, you'll see the eyelid come over if the bird is still at some level conscious, or not. It has some level of higher brain activity, even if it's not conscious at the moment. And it's a good conservative estimate because it's one of the last reflexes to fall off when the bird's dying. So, I mean, technically the bird may be brain dead at this point when, you're checking the eye reflex. But you know for sure once that eye reflex is gone that chicken is dead. So if I have to euthanize any of my birds, I always check that and wait for that and make sure that reflex is gone, and that's when I'm happy to say that bird is dead. It's different depending on, I think, who's doing it, but I feel that's, for me, is a good clear indicator that I'm 100% happy that bird is dead. I'm just putting up another question, or I guess kind of a comment as well. If our listeners are backyarders who want to breed for meat, they could buy old breeds for meat, and they'll be easy to raise and keep healthy. I definitely think so. I think that, well, personally, if you're able to keep chickens for any reason, I would definitely go for older breeds or heritage breeds or something really fun and different than just a bog standard, high production bird. They tend to be hardier. They have something that we would call hybrid vigor. So they're not being bred from a narrower pool of genetics, so they've quite a diverse pool of genetics going in to make this bird. And that just tends to make them healthier because they're less prone to recessive issues that might come up. So yeah, I would definitely recommend, if you were interested in chickens, to get something that wasn't, your super high, raw 308 production animal, because it will be easier to keep healthier. It will probably just be healthier because it's going to grow slower, just naturally, and it's just a bit more fun.
I agree with what you said, Laura. I think there's one last question, then maybe we should think about wrapping it up if there aren't any more questions coming in. I think it's Danielle asked a question. Oh, 2 questions. Okay. Right. I'll wait for you to.
Sorry. So they're asking about, they know, Krysta, that you don't have any chickens. They're asking if Vicky or I do. And no, unfortunately, we don't. That's not by choice. That's because we work with chickens. For biosecurity reasons, we're not allowed to keep chickens ourselves. And that's to limit the disease spread, especially because, as you can imagine, our chickens would be outdoors and would be exposed to a lot more. So if I track, say, my chicken species into the poultry shed, maybe my chicken is able to deal with things that are happening, outdoors, the bacterial load and whatnot, because it's a less intensive breed. But I could easily contaminate the birds that we're working with, who aren't bred to be quite as hardy because they're bred for very specific growth traits. So no, we're currently not allowed to keep chickens ourselves. So I'm going to have to wait till I retire to get my chickens, which is a bit sad. Oh, and just a clarification about the putting water on the bird. She just wanted to clarify that just like briefly dousing the bird with water, not drowning them or soaking them or whatnot. Just I think to get more of a startle response, or to maybe surprise them, shake them out of their shock if that's what they're in. Sorry, pardon me. And I think this is our last question. And we're being asked if we'll be teaching this class again later this year or next year. Oh, sorry, and again, a clarification, an injured chicken, a chicken found injured, and just, dousing water on the head. We certainly do hope to run this course again. We don't have an exact date of when it will be run. This was our first time running it, so you can imagine the amount of work that went into producing all this. It took quite some time, but now that we have all the core material, it should make it easier to get the course going again in the future. So yeah, we definitely plan to run it again. But Krysta, you might be able to confirm, but as far as I know, we don't have a set date of when that would be yet.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything about a date for or a set date for the future, like you said. But I do think that there is the idea to run this multiple times. Maybe not more than once a year, but I mean, I don't know for certain. So I think that's still sort of in the works to figure out the next date that this course is running.
Okay, well, I'm glad you guys seem to enjoy the course, and it certainly sparked a lot of interesting discussions on the forum. Sorry we weren't able to read them all. There was a lot, but it did seem like you guys were doing a great job of answering each other's questions anyway, and part of the time we weren't even needed. So that was really great too, just the exchange of information that went on. So that's it for this. Hope you've all done well. If you've not finished your quizzes, you've still got time. And good luck with your chickens.
Thanks everyone for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see you again maybe in the future or at some point. We'll cross paths again. And like Laura said, you still have, I think, a week to finish up the quizzes and then, yeah, to finish the course up. So yeah, we'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.